Do you ever wonder what's really going on in government, locally, in the state of Tennessee, and across the country? I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson, and on Tennessee Today, we dive into the issues that shape our communities, from local policy to national debates. Each episode, I break down key topics and issues, share my perspective from over 20 years in the Tennessee legislature, and talk with guests about the decisions that impact your daily life. I hope you enjoy these honest conversations and that they help you stay informed and engaged. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Tennessee Today wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today, I have a really cool guest, one of the most powerful people in Tennessee state government. And that is the Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton. Now, Cameron and I know each other because we've served together for a number. When were you first elected?
Elected in 10, started in 11.
Okay, so in 2011. Of course, I came in 2004. So I predate you a little bit. But Cameron has moved quickly through the legislative leadership ranks. And now, as Speaker of the House, has one of the most if not the most powerful positions in the legislature. So welcome to Tennessee Today. I look forward to having a great conversation with you about Tennessee and Tennessee government.
Glad to be here. And the thing is, I never understand why House members always move to the Senate, but the Senate people never move to the House. Like, why is it always the one direction?
Well, there are a lot of theories around that. One is that the intellectual aptitude of the House is so much higher than the Senate that you just can't think. The other is that you age out of the House. At a certain point in time, you just become too old to be in the House. We need to move over.
Oh, you got to move up. Once you hit the maturity rate.
Moving up.
Once you hit maturity rate, you move up to the Senate. So
you move over. It's kind of like, you go to elementary school and then you go to middle school and then you go to high school. So anyway, no.
So is the Senate like college?
It's postgraduate.
Okay,
work.
all right, postgraduate.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. No, it's funny because members as well as the public view the two bodies differently, and we function differently. Although at the state government, it's a little bit different than like at the federal level. But, obviously for those listeners who don't know, in the Tennessee General Assembly, we have 99 members in the House, and in the Senate, we have 33, which means, quite honestly, the Speaker of the House's job of corralling 99 members to come to some kind of consensus is quite a bit more challenging than the Senate Speaker who has 33 to deal with.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, it is, and although it just depends on. I mean, we there's a few members over the years on both sides of the aisle sometimes that we have to try to pull back in a little bit. I think. What we had found out over the years of my 6 years as Speaker going into my 7th year is the rules for the House were set in place back in the 70s, and we just kept adopting them, and they weren't in place to handle what the younger generation, some of them, are trying to do, and it's more about personal things than it is about function and Tennessee as a whole. And so we've had to change the rules, which I think has helped us be able to keep the level playing field. And what I tell members is, you have respect and decorum, and you have debate, and then you have the institutional of itself. But we're there to do the job for Tennesseans, and you can agree, you can disagree, but you have to do it in a certain way. And I liken it a lot to like a courtroom. When you're in a courtroom, if you're there, you just don't stand up and start yelling immediately. The judge will call you out of order, remove you from court. There's a process, and so we're trying to make sure that we keep the process and keep everybody in the same realm, and that allows us to operate more efficiently and smoothly.
Yeah, I think people probably don't realize that each of the two, the Senate or the House, they each get to make their own rules, and so we decide for ourselves how we're going to operate as a body. And certainly the performance politics of today are different than the performance politics of the 1970s. And to some degree, we all have to kind of regulate that to the degree so that the two bodies can function. Otherwise, we become much like our friends at the federal side of things, where we just don't do anything because we just spend our time yelling at the sky. But before we get into the operations of how state government works and the critical, important role that you play, a little bit of background for our listeners. You're a fifth generation. 8th generation. And is your family all from? Has it always been in the Middle Tennessee, Cumberland area?
Yeah, so it goes it goes back to right before statehood, and so they were two brothers came across, and one settled in Scott County, Tennessee, in Huntsville, Oneida, and that's kind of where the generation started, and they've stayed there throughout, and then we, as most people, you kind of branch out into East, Mid, and West a little bit.
Yeah. So do you still have family up in Scott County?
A lot, because in a rural area, when you move in and you're one of the basic families there when it started, so related to the Sextons, obviously, which then they married into the Jeffers, which married into the Huffs. So, yeah, we have a lot of family in Scott County.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm big on I wouldn't say genealogy, but connections to the past. And I think it's cool to go back and like my family originates from South Alabama, believe it or not, Dothan. And we've got this family cemetery back in Dothan. And a couple of years ago, Nicole and I made our way back to Dothan to look and go to the family cemetery. I'm sure you have the same thing.
We do. Yeah, we do. When I went back and researched the names, like we have a Christopher Columbus Sexton in the family. And so it's interesting also going back and seeing the names of what people were called back in the day and how that they influenced. Like my dad is Dwight David Sexton, but he was named after Dwight David Eisenhower. And so it's interesting when you also go back and look at the history of the names.
Yeah, 8 generations. That's
long time.
It's kind of that's
can't get more than that. How about that?
Yeah, it'd be a challenge to get more than that. Well, you couldn't because
statehood. Yeah,
we came in state. Yeah, 1796 for those that don't keep up with Tennessee history. Okay, so what led you into running for the legislature? I know everybody, those of us in elected office, we always get asked that question, so I'm obligated to ask it. So
no, mine was a little different, and so. It wasn't my idea initially to run. I had local business people and local elected officials. I live in Crossville to come to me and ask me if I would run. Now, what I will say is I wasn't their first, second, or third choice. I was their fourth choice, but it turned out well for me and for them in the end.
Who was in office before you? Who's
Eric Swafford. And so I ran against him in a primary. And so they wanted me to primary him, a lot of conversations. And if you ever come through my area during campaign season or just listen to the radio when you come through, my motto is people before politics, and it came from.
You have a billboard on the interstate.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
And so it's people before politics, and what that means is what the business community was feeling at the time is that their representative was not listening to what they wanted them to do, and they were actually pushing back, and it became very adversarial. And so they were looking for another direction over a couple different things, mainly over the election commission at the time. And so I decided to run, and then that's people for politics came in because they felt like the person was choosing politics over people first, and they were doing it a little bit backwards. And so I ran and ran a good race and ended up winning the primary and then general election, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah. So what led you to want to be Speaker? I mean, that's a big job. For those who don't know, the Speaker of the House is elected internally, like the Speaker of the Senate. It's only the members vote on that. You'd held some leadership positions within the chamber, but what led you to run for Speaker?
Well, it was an interesting time when that happened. When I first came in, Speaker Harwell was there. She was there for a while till she ran for governor. Then there was a speaker's race when she ran for governor. At that time, look, I can count votes. I did not have any votes to even make it competitive, and so it was between Glenn Casta and Curtis Johnson. And at that point, you're like, okay, this is going to stay the same for a while. So then you start saying, okay, what does the future look like? What should I do? And then no one could have predicted within 4 months we had an issue and the speaker had to resign. And I took another look at it, and it looked like that I had a better opportunity than I did. And so I thought, well, why not? And why not set some policy, work on the state, but also try to build consensus back. The problem we were having at the time in the House is we were very divided. And so I was looking at more trying to bring everybody back together in the caucus and have a functioning unit so Tennessee would win. And that was the purpose behind it. And after about 5 different ballots, I ended up winning that long day in the caucus meeting. And there's been trials and tribulations and ups and downs like anything else, but I think we've done very well over the last 6 years.
So what's the life of a speaker like? What's because again, a lot of listeners, viewers don't realize they think this is our full-time gig, and maybe for the speaker it is. But for me, I was at the hospital this morning at some meetings there, and then had a couple of legislative kind of meetings that I've had to have, and then come out here to do this with you. What's the typical day that the speaker has?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is what you make of it, right? And so, there's previous speakers who've done it differently than I have. It's just a different thing. But my parents always taught me is when you take on the job, you do it to the best of your ability. And so that's what I've always tried to do. And so we travel a lot around the state. We listen to a lot of people. We work on a lot of policy, but I try to do it to the best of the ability. And so some people will look at it and infer that I'm doing other things, but really it's about doing the role of speaker and understanding our state a bit better. Look, a typical day, if we're in session, it's a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions. There's a lot of different things.
I know that's true because I try to get meetings with you, and you're always, somehow you make time for your House members to get in, but you don't seem to make time for your Senate
come
colleagues.
Back to the House. Come back to the House. But look, I mean, it can be very busy. It slows down towards the end of session. Out of session, I'm easily in Nashville 1 to 2 days a week with meetings and other things I have to take care of in the speaker role. And then I travel the other 2 or 3 days. Look, what as speaker, the surprise as speaker is when you go in speaker, you realize a lot. You realize that you set the committees, you work on policy, you work with the governor, you have the budget. There's a lot of things based on your role as state representative or chairman or in leadership, what that entails. The couple aspects they don't tell you about is I also have 200 employees under me. And so there's a lot of HR issues. There's a lot of other issues that we deal with, and having a good team in place really helps take that pressure off me. And so you have the managing of 200 people. You have that part as a business, which kind of goes against what you think. And then you have all these lawsuits of all these groups, ACLU, who sue us, and you're a part of those lawsuits now too, just simply because you're speaker.
Yeah. I don't think people realize how much goes into being speaker. There is a tremendous amount of work. I'm always impressed with how you and Lieutenant Governor McNally are able to balance all that. How do you balance? I've always been curious from the speaker's perspective. How do you balance your role as speaker against your role as a member of the House of Representatives? Because, I mean, you still are still elected by a local group to represent the interests of your district. How do you do that? That would seem to be challenging.
Well, I mean, it can be. I mean, the good news is in my House district, it aligns with what we're trying to do as a state, so it kind of makes it easier. I think you've had other speakers in place where maybe their district didn't align with the conservativeness of the state, and so it becomes a harder dynamic for them to push between. It's the same thing I try to give all House members. Look, you need to vote your district, whatever that is, right? That is fine. And just go about doing it. And so we try to do that. I think I've been fortunate that my district's very conservative, and that lines up with where we're trying to move the state. But the balance really is it's the balance between being speaker, having a job, having a family, trying to have off time, right? That's your time management, because speaker can be 100% of your time, and it's a lot of my time. But you also have to pull back and make sure that there's other aspects of your life that you need to devote time to as well.
So obviously, as you've alluded to, the speaker is, wow, that's big. That's big. Those of us on the membership side, we look to the speaker for guidance, helping set the agenda, while also you've got to work with the executive branch, the judicial branch, particularly the executive branch. We go back into session here in about 9 days, January 13th, 12 noon on Tuesday. I'm looking forward to it. I'm one of those members that actually love session. Yeah. I got elected to go in to do session, so I'm excited about looking at it. I'm also one of those Senate members that actually enjoys working with my House colleagues.
Yeah, we enjoy it too.
Yeah, I've had a lot of good House sponsors working on legislation, and you've always been good to work with as well. What do you see? I know from the Senate, I have my perspective of what the key issues might be coming into session. What do you see as being our big issues? I mean, besides the normal, education's always going to be a top issue. Healthcare is always going to be a top issue. What are the things you see floating out there?
I think there's a couple, and I think to go back to your where I thought you were going with your earlier question is what I've had to learn as speaker too with members on setting the agenda is to speak last. Because what happens a lot of times is if I say something, not because it's Cameron Sexton, but because the speaker's in front of it, the members will coalesce around that idea, and it cuts off all debate. So I have to be very careful when I'm in meetings with chairmen and other members as we're talking about policy and directions. I want to hear from them first, try to ask them questions first before we start trying to figure out where we want to go, because I don't want them to feel like they're not part of the conversation. I think that really helps members feel engaged and actually form better ideas. Of how
and that's a huge difference between how our federal legislature works, right? I mean, at the federal level, of course, there's a movement to try and change that. I mean, you had a Speaker McCarthy that got ousted because it was so centralized. And even today, Speaker Johnson at the federal level is challenged with this centralization of he is making all the decisions, and you've got this whole group of members out there that want to be part of the discussion, but really aren't. I think at the state level, I think both of our speakers do a really good job about letting members be a huge part and guide the conversation, and then come in and put kind of guardrails around it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, I remember I had a meeting with my chairman when I was first elected speaker, shortly after into that first session. And I said, you all are the experts. I put you in this role because I feel like whether you're in education, commerce, judicial, whatever it may be, you're the experts. Where do we need to go? Y'all deal with it every single day, what we need to achieve. And I remember one chairman goes, well, what happens if it's not the direction you want? I'm like, well, that's not my concern. It's not where I want to go. It's where you think we should go, right? You're in these roles to feel like you can affect change. And so I think that's a big problem in federal government, right? You have there's no coalescing around the caucus. There's too many fractions. There's too many of this. In Tennessee, we've done very well of not fracturing out like other states or the federal government. And so I think that's been very beneficial. As we look to where we want to go, I mean, look, in general terms, I think if you look, affordability is a big concern, whether that's healthcare, whether that's housing. I think Florida's done some inventive things on getting developers to build workforce housing, not affordable housing, but workforce housing, which is more or less 80% to 120% of income for people who are getting out of college or getting out of TCATs or trying to make a difference. It's not affordable for them. And so we're looking at some of those things. We've been focused on criminal justice, making sure our streets are safe and the public feels safe. We're going to look at this year. It's a lot of different, hopefully, illegal immigration things to really help our state and move our state forward. We want people to come to our state who are here legally, but if you're not, then we need to have a better route to deal with that situation as well.
Yeah. How much do you think that what we do at the state level parallels what happens at the federal level? Like you mentioned, immigration. And, in the past 10 years, states have, and we've talked about this on my show before, states have really stepped more into the immigration space than we ever did. Because we've recognized, one, the limitations that the federal government has in what they're doing, although that has changed dramatically in the past year under the Trump administration. But how much do you see the immigration issue as a state issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming a bigger state issue. I think one of the privileges I get as speaker is get to talk to other speakers and meet with them, and we all have the same thoughts. But I also think what you've seen is states saying, we don't want to defer to the federal government anymore, right? I think that may have happened in the 80s and 90s, but today the states are taking charge of it, which is the way I think the Constitution intended it, to be honest with you. And so you see states more active in different policies. I also think what you have with the Trump administration, they want states to be more empowered. Look, the Trump administration, when I talk to them up there, what they talk about is to put something in federal statute. It doesn't stay forever because it's going to have to be by executive order because unfortunately they don't really ever pass that much. And so they're really trying to empower the states to do more locally, to do more in the state level. And so, look, from that standpoint, I think a lot of things, we can't fix everything through state, but I think we can set a pathway to allow ourselves to be more efficient and effective.
Well, of course, as a idealist, federalist, I love the fact that states are much more engaged. I love the fact that legislatures are much more engaged than they have been in the past. Now, as speaker, you have to coordinate, it might not be the right word, collaborate a lot with the administration. How does the speaker role collaborate or work with the governor? Because a lot of people, I was having a meeting earlier this morning. A lot of people see the governor as, kind of setting the agenda since he's elected statewide. And I try to remind people, well, while the governor may set his or her agenda, the legislature is actually in Tennessee state government where most of the decisions actually make. So how does that work with the
That's a good
governors?
question. But one thing on that previous,
Well, they're all good questions.
They
on
are
this
great
show.
questions.
I just want to point out that we don't ask back. Or if it's a bad question, we're going to edit it out of the show.
Well, well, that was a bad question. No, I'm kidding. No, so I'll just remind your listeners, because they may not know, Tennessee is the number one state for federalism in America. And we achieved that this last year. We were told we were number one, which goes to your point of states taking power back from the federal government. Look, I think I'm going to say the same thing that Governor Lee says. When he travels and he goes and he talks to other governors, the relationship that the other governors have with the legislature is not good. It's always combative. It's always fighting. It's infighting. It's this. There's a power play going on. And I think with Governor Lee, I didn't get to serve with Governor Haslam as Speaker, so I can't speak to that. And I'm not saying it didn't happen this way. But in the role that I'm in with the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor and myself, there's no power play. There's no ego. Like we walk into the room and we have conversations and it's like, what do we want to achieve? Where do we want to go? What are you hearing? What are you hearing? How we get there? It doesn't matter who gets the credit with us three. It's what's going to be best for Tennessee. And I think that's very unique. And if you have leaders like that, and then that boils down to the chairman and to other people in leadership, and it more becomes a cohesive unit. Not saying that we don't have disagreements and not saying that there aren't things that flare up every now and then. But if you build a relationship, then it will survive those things. And what I talk about is I have a brother, and so if we have an argument or a fight, at the end of the day, he's still my brother, right? So I have to figure out we're still going to talk, we're still going to do this. Now sometimes it gets a little not on my side, but you hear people say I don't talk to my brother anymore, my sister anymore. That's a shame. But when you know someone and then they feel like they're family or they are family, that's a different relationship, right? It's harder to stay mad at that person long term, I think. And so I want to build relationships within the caucus of the House and with the Senate and with the governor. That's like a family thing where you can have disagreements, but at the end of the day, it doesn't destroy the relationship. If that's the goal that we can have disagreement, we can have debate. We don't all have to be on the same page, but we're never going to not do what's best for Tennessee in the end. I think that's what's made our state great in the last 7 years with the governor.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there is a lot of as a member who's now getting to be one of the older members, and I've been so proud of the development of the legislature. The legislature, you remember Senator Henry, who predates all of us. But Senator Henry, he was on finance with me, and I sat next to him when Speaker McNally was chairman of finance, and Senator Henry would always say, well, I'm a governor's man, whatever the governor wanted. Because back in the day, the governor would send a note down to the committee and say, I want this to pass, and they'd read the note and it'd pass. I've been really proud of the legislature the way we have now, and it's really because of folks like you and Speaker McNally, Lieutenant Governor McNally, who, kind of represent the legislature to the executive branch. And I think the legislature's influence has really emerged as a real bright spot for Tennessee. Doesn't mean we don't have a great relationship with the executive branch. We do. But at the end of the day, in Tennessee's form of government, because of the weak veto power that the governor has, the legislature really is where all the decisions ultimately get made. And I think the framers of our constitutions really believe that that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I remember when I was a new member and I wasn't in the rooms for the budget meetings trying to work out the budget, but I was watching when people walked out, and people walked out mad and red-faced and blood pressure was up and throwing things, and you're like, why is that the norm, right? And so I'm proud over the last several years, I think for a long time now, that our meetings with the budget between the House and Senate is a lot better, right? I think there's a lot more conversation and communication than there was, which helps. I don't think we want to surprise each other, right, with things. And so I think when you build a relationship and you have the working relationships, you could overcome a lot of differences. And sometimes we just don't agree, but we don't allow it to blow up other stuff, right? It's like the House wants this, the Senate doesn't want it. Okay, we'll move on. The Senate wants this, the House doesn't want it, we'll move on. It doesn't blow up the whole thing, and I think we're better for it. And then what that does is make our budget much more stronger. You get to go up to New York to the bond rating agencies, and they talk about how great our state is, and you're always a proponent of putting more money in the rainy day fund, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Which used to drive the House nuts. But as I sent members up there with you and the governor and the constitutional officers, they realized all of a sudden the importance of what that means to the bond rating companies. And so I think when we have better understandings of each other and where we're really trying to go, it really does help us long term.
Yeah. So you've been in the speaker role now for 7 years, right? I got that
Going
right?
in my 7th. Yeah.
Yeah. What have you enjoyed most about it?
Wow. Well, look, I'm like you. I like policy, and so I like having the ability to really affect change through policy. I enjoy working with the governor, lieutenant governor, and the Senate, and on the budget and other things. But what I really enjoy, the reason I got into politics, and I worked on campaigns before I ever ran for office, is I like meeting people, and so I like the aspect of being able to travel over the state, meeting with various people throughout all Tennessee, to have a better understanding of what's affecting them, where they want us to go. And so I really do enjoy that. I enjoy the speaker's role. Every day I wake up and I'm blessed and I'm happy that I'm able to do this. I don't know how long I'm going to do this, but I also know that I'm in a very fortunate situation where I can affect change, but also listen to other people in our state to move our state to where we want to go. And I think the last 6-7 years, we have moved mountains in Tennessee when all the other states are now looking at us, whether it's Indiana or Florida or Alabama, they're all looking saying, or Oklahoma, Tennessee did this, why can't we do this? And I think that's where we want to be as a state.
Yeah, yeah. So on the policy side, one of the big discussions that we're having here locally, which I think we're also having statewide, and I'll be interested in your take on this, is we are trying to, as a matter of fact, as I was driving out here from work to do this, I was on a phone call with one of our local school board members talking about development and how we as a state, what he was wanting to talk here locally about how we deal with growth and development within our own county. But that's really true all across the state, particularly in the Middle Tennessee area where Nashville and the collar counties are having exponential growth as compared to the rest of us. In your community, first of all, what's that kind of conversation like? And then on a larger scale for Tennessee, as Speaker, how do you view the balance act between growth and development and keeping ourselves Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think locally, I don't try to get involved with the county commission or school board unless they ask me a question. It's not my place to interject, and so I very rarely interject. One of the few times I do is they've asked me about development, what to do, and my thing is the number one thing you always develop is your children and their education. That's the number one development thing. If you can't develop that, 10, 20 years down the road, you're not going to have anything anyway. So you've got to invest and do things to improve your K through 12 system. If you are one of the tops in the state or tops in the region, you will have development coming to you because people want to live there, businesses or want to be there, right? So you got to focus on the education first of all. Outside of that, you have to be very careful about extending things that don't fit into the mold of your community. You don't take everything. I think in the 80s and 90s, we were willing to take anybody who was wanting to come to Tennessee for a business and shell out enormous amount of money to them. I think what you've seen with the policies that we've done, that was with Governor Haslam and Governor Lee with the General Assemblies, is we can be more selective on who we want to come into our state and what we want to give them. And we don't have to give as much money as we used to because it's the economic systems here is better, the taxes are better here, the property taxes are better here. There's a lot of incentives for them to move to Tennessee. And Chattanooga fiber is a huge part of why people are moving to Chattanooga. So I think you have to be careful. Look, I think you want to go after what fits, but you don't want to have to go after everything. But it really does, in my mind, start with education. If you don't have the workforce to meet those needs, it really doesn't matter how much property you have or how many industrial parks you have if they're not going to have the workers there to meet that need in 5 to 10 years.
Do you have any concern about I'm trying to think of the right word here, I'll say culture of Tennessee changing because of so much of the influx of immigration, that's with an E, immigration of people from other states coming to Tennessee, because it is a great place to live. You have a great lifestyle combined with incredibly low taxes, probably the lowest tax rate per capita in the United States. But that draws a lot of people in who aren't necessarily Appalachian people or Cumberland Mountain people. Do you have any concerns about how that's impacting upon our state?
I think the concern. I think there's two types of concerns. A lot of people want to talk about the political concern, and then you have a growth concern, right? And so on the first side, on the political concern, I think most of the people who are moving here from other states are conservative or very conservative. And so from that standpoint, politically wise, I don't think it's as big as what some people are trying to make it out to be, that you have a lot of liberals from New York or California moving here. I don't. You have some, but I don't think that's the mass people coming in. I think on the growth side, there's a lot of concern on growth sides, whether it's roads, whether it's water, schools. And so you can have growth, but exponential growth doesn't help you. And I think Rutherford County is an example of that. They've had double-digit growth for a number of years in a row with population, and that's stressed a lot of the local because they don't have the resources without having to raise taxes through the roof to come up with ways to help keep it. So yes, certain growth is good. Exponential growth can be bad. We're looking at how to improve roads. That's why we went to choice lanes to help us with that as we continue to look at other sources, water, sewer. I remember when we had a lot of money, we were in the meetings with the governor, and they were talking about infrastructure with TDEC, and do we do water, do we do sewer, do we do regional? And we had conversations in there with TDEC is, why do we want to put in sewers when you can do septic tanks, but not everybody has water? Why not focus on water and getting water to people's home and not having well water? Because that's still 15% of the people in Tennessee don't have running water into their house through the normal system like most people. So I think there's a lot of concerns around that. And so I think one of the things that we're very blessed at, though, is why we're a low tax state, is the amount of tourism that we have in our state, which we're very fortunate to have that, because that allows us to take someone else's money, right, from another state and use it to benefit Tennesseans, whether that's in education, whether that's roads. And so I never want us to lose the perspective of we need to have that Southern hospitality for people visiting our state, because we are very dependent on those sales tax dollars.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think probably the thing I hear locally talked about most is wrestling with growth population-wise. Now, Hamilton County, my home county, District 11, overall is not a fast growth county. But if you go into certain pockets of the county, it is, particularly where, as you alluded to earlier, particularly where there is like a really good school. Mm-hmm. I mean, you'll have, we're seeing, families that have multi-generational families of farmers who this generation's cashing out on their farm and selling their property to developers. I think we're seeing that all across the state. And we even had last year, a discussion here trying to develop a growth plan. And even within that discussion, it was controversial because we're all wrestling with – because Tennessee's never been that state, right? Where people just really want to flock to the state and be a part of the success that we're having here. And part of that success is driven by the fact that we are fiscally conservative, right? Mm-hmm. So on the side of spending, how do you see Tennessee continuing to control how much it spends? Yeah. As we also still wrestle with this growth aspect?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I want to address a myth that people are saying out there, because what they'll say is, what people like to do is take a little bit of fact and then they spin it to meet whatever narrative they want.
No, so they don't. Do people really do that?
Oh, they do, And so one of the myths, or one of the facts that they'll say is, well, in the last 15 years, the Republican General Assembly has doubled the state budget, okay? That's a fact. It's not really doubled, but that's a fact. It has. And then they want to say we have excess spending, right? That's not true at all. And so what I will say is when you look at the budget, is you look at the rate of inflation, which we all know during the Biden years was through the roof. You look at the rate of inflation, we are only about plus 1.8% more than the rate of inflation. So if you were growing your household budget and it was inflation plus 1.8%, I think you've done a pretty good job of controlling growth, especially with healthcare and all the other areas that you're having to do in transportation. And so it's a mixed message by them. The other thing I will say is as we put money in the rainy day fund, when I came in with Governor Haslam, it was a couple $100 million. Now it's over $2 billion. That counts as new spending, and that's always going to count as spending. So when you save, it counts as spending. So there's some misconceptions there of people as well. And so the final thing I'll say is as you're looking at the budget, you just said we have all these people moving in. Well, what does that mean? Well, from the state level, that means we have to invest more in roads. We have to invest more in higher education facilities. We have to invest more in K through 12. We have to invest more. So as our population increases, we also have to invest money. So to be able to handle all these issues, this population increase, all these other things, and never raise taxes, we actually cut taxes by $4 billion, right? And we're still growing. And be able to live within our means, and we don't spend every single dollar of recurring money on recurring expenses. We save it. We use it as one-time money to fund different projects and different things to help us. But I think we've done very good. But there's a misconception out there from some who say, oh, they doubled the budget. Look how bad they are. Well, you got to look at the details. They don't want to tell you the details, and I think we've done very, very well and been very conservative in how we moved our state forward.
Well, and a lot of that budget increase was the influx of federal dollars,
right,
which was COVID relief money, which we're now, coming to the end of. But it does make for a conversation around state spending when you see the federal government starting to push things that the federal government has been doing, pushing those things back down on the states. States are going to have to figure out, and Tennessee's not alone in this, but we're going to have to figure out what things are really worth doing and what things would be nice to do, but we simply can't afford to do them, right?
Or third, look for a different way to do it. Right. And so like a lot of times states want to do expansion, right, of healthcare on the our 10-Cam program, Medicaid program. They want to do expansion. Well, you look at the Indianas and stuff and their Medicaid programs, they're having to raise taxes or figure something out how to pay for it. And the feds, as we predicted, has reduced the match, or they're looking at to reduce the match because they know they can't afford it. Right. And so it goes back to, if we're looking at it, having government-paid health insurance is not the best option for our state. We know that with TennCare based on the Bredesen years when he had to make tough decisions. And so how do we provide affordable health care to individuals in our state that they can use without bankrupting the state, right? And without it being a government-run, socialized, single-payer system. And I think that's where Tennessee's prepared to lead the country. I think we're working with the White House on what that looks like. But you also have to think out of the box how to accomplish these goals as well.
Yeah, and I'll point out to our listeners that Tennessee is the only block grant state when it comes to Medicaid. And to those who don't know what that means, block grant, the federal government basically gives you a certain allotment of money every year to run your program. And then within our relationship with the feds, if we save money, we get to keep a portion of that savings and reinvest it in our system, which allows us to experiment and play with other types of methods of delivering healthcare at the lowest cost. But healthcare, as one who practices in that space, when I'm not playing the legislative role, it's a challenge because people don't want less healthcare; they want more healthcare. People don't want to wait longer to get their appointment; they want it now, and people want to see the most skilled technician that they can see, and that often, the most skilled often means the most expensive. And so it is a different type of economic formula than other types of lines of business. It's just because of the nature of it. But this whole federalist thing of pushing more and more responsibility back to the states, one area that you've kind of been a leader in that I want to get where your thoughts are now is a couple of years ago, you at least wanted us to think about it. And oftentimes, people don't realize with legislatures and legislators that we'll offer an idea simply to generate the conversation and make an awareness of it. A couple of years ago, you offered the idea of, well, wonder if we went without federal dollars for our education system, what would that look like? And of course, since that time, you've had the Trump administration come in and the Trump administration saying, hey, we're either going to significantly reduce the size of the federal Department of Education or we're going to eliminate the Department of Education, which means a lot of those responsibilities would be pushed back down to the state. What has your thinking evolved to now, from going from, hey, wonder if we did completely without the federal funding to where we are now where we're seeing a push of these things back down to the state?
Yeah, I mean, look, the premise was at the time, and I'll link it to a family. So I have 3 children. And let's say as a parent, I give them money every month to go buy food or do whatever for, say they're in college. I'm like, oh, here's some food, go stock up your fridge. And I go in and I look and I see that they're buying all this organic stuff and they're buying this expensive milk, and I'm like, what's wrong with regular milk? What's wrong with it's my money. I want to know how it's being used, right? And if they're not using it how I think, as a parent, you're going to say, well, I'm not going to give you any more money, or you're going to have to do it a little bit different, right? That's just the basis of someone who's giving you money. What's the thing? Same thing with the federal government. When you're taking the federal government's money, it's like they're the parent, and they're going to tell you exactly how you're supposed to use it. Whether we agree with it or not, they're going to tell us how to spend it. And so what I've talked about is we need a way to become as independent as we can from the federal government. We need to have total control of how we do. There's nothing more important in our state than education. The federal government's money that comes into our schools doesn't go into the classroom. It goes into other programs that I think we can run better for the same amount of money, and I think we can do it and have more success. Like one of the things is the federal money comes in for a free and reduced lunch program, right? But what they tell the schools is if you have extra food left over that's not wrapped up or that's not packaged, you have to throw it away. Well, we know we have all these kids going home without meals at night, but we can't box it up to send meals home with them at night because the federal government says you can't. Makes no sense. So we have all this food waste, which I would assume is 25 to 30% easy, which if you're in a restaurant business, you're going bankrupt at that point. But we're okay with throwing all this money out and just throwing it in the trash can, and I think we can do it better. And so I think what happens is if you can cut those ties to the federal government the most that you can, then you can have the autonomy to run the program the way you think it needs to be run, because Tennessee is a little bit different than other states. And what federal government does in the same time is they know that when they get you to a certain level of federal money, you can't cut the ties anymore. And you're stuck because you can't literally afford to cut those ties because you don't have the budget. And some states are in those situations. And so I think we need to look at reducing the amount of federal money, continue to look at what we can do by ourselves, and education seemed to be one of the easiest spots to go in to make that point.
Yeah. So with the Trump administration's, and this was part of their campaign, and as Trump has done very well with, he's kept his commitment to everything he said he was going to do, and the paring down of the Department of Education. Has that changed? Has your thinking around what the state absorbs in terms of cost around education, has your thinking evolved or changed?
Well, I think our costs would go down on what we would have to do. It depends on how they do it, right? And so the as they say, devil's in the details. But we know how much bureaucracy there is in Washington and in the Department of Education, how much bureaucracy is there. You look at when President Trump went in with all the aid going over to the country and all the fraud and all that stuff going on. Looking at what's happening in Minnesota, right, Minneapolis. So the federal government is not efficient at all. So we're spending all this money in this bureaucracy that doesn't flow to the states. To the point of looking at like the Medicaid programs, you mentioned the block grant. If the federal government will reduce the bureaucracy and block grant the money to the states and block grant it and say, we want you to achieve this, whatever it is, right? Whether that's higher high school graduation rates, whether it's no one going home without food that they can't afford, right? If they want to set parameters for us to use it, that's great. But when they try to tell you how to spend it, that becomes a problem. So I think if they will block grant us the money and say, here's the money, here's what we want you to cover, you all go cover it, I think we'll have a lot more success. It doesn't require a lot more money from us, but it would open us up to be able to meet the needs a little bit differently than probably what the federal government would do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I try to stress on this show because a lot of folks don't realize, the difference between the state government and the federal government is that we are constitutionally required to balance our budget. And so, it is a zero-sum game. We only have so many dollars to spend, and we have to spend them wisely where we spend them. And part of the debate is often, are we spending the money in the spaces that Tennesseans think is best? I would argue that 99.9% of the time we hit that target pretty well. I mean, we invest heavily. Our two biggest investments are K-12 and higher education and healthcare. And I think amongst most Tennesseans, they would rank those as two of their most important.
Yeah, well, and I think with your leadership and when Governor Haslam came in and the House Governor Haslam had the toughest job. He had to cut $1 billion in 2011 from the budget. Because even though we're supposed to
I try to remind members of that.
Yeah,
because,
it was tough.
During your leadership and during Governor Lee's
We've been blessed.
We've been very blessed. And I'm always the guy, Chicken Little, that sees the sky falling. I try to remind our members that some of them, I say, you weren't here when the
lean was tough.
Yeah.
But what I will say is is the people also need to understand why we had to cut $1 billion at that time. Because how we do it today under the Republican leadership is it is a truly balanced budget. There's no gimmicks. There's none of this. And so what was happening prior to that, before 2011 when Governor Haslam came in, is they were overestimating revenues. Instead of coming in at 1.5, they would say 2.5 because they knew that they didn't want to cut. And so they overestimated revenue, which then the next year it becomes a bigger hole. Then all your local elected officials, remember, they started taking money from them to cover the budget hole. And then they started taking money from the road department to cover the budget hole. So what you had is you had a balanced budget, yes, not truly balanced because they were gimmicking it, because they didn't want to make the cuts. They didn't want to make the hard decisions. They wanted everybody to win, and they didn't set the priorities right. Governor Haslam comes in, cuts $1 billion, sets the priorities with your leadership and Speaker Ramsey at the time and Harwell and others that were there. We set the track, and now we truly have a no-gimmick, balanced budget that we live within our means. We make the hard choices. Doesn't mean some people win, some people loses, and you have to prioritize. And we're a whole lot better off these last 15 years budget-wise than we were pick a number of years.
Yeah. So let's wrestle with a really tough bull here. At the national level, probably the issue, either affordability or healthcare or the affordability of healthcare are going to be probably two of the key national issues as we go into the 2026 election cycle. I'm often asked for the solution to the healthcare dilemma that we have, and I'm not sure that I can offer a solution. But it's obviously a challenge for the state. And if the federal government continues to push things down to us and they push more healthcare down on us, do you see? Is your thinking around healthcare similar to your thinking around education, that if like with our block grant program, if the federal government will give us the resources that we're entitled to and allow us to be creative with them, we can at least have a better solution to our healthcare challenge?
I think so. The problem with the government plans a lot of times is, on the backside, the government's going to subsidize them. So they don't really worry about runaway costs. You can see that with the exchange and what's happening there. But I think when you look at the TennCare model, is if we were going to do it, what we've talked a lot about is people on TennCare, when they move to the private market, they're not used to making decisions, right? They're not used to having the co-pays and the deductibles. So we need a TennCare program that also has a health savings account model in it that also allows them to make decisions where they're in control of what they use. And if they use too much, then they have to pay. It shouldn't be 100% free the whole time. That just leads to more fraud and going to physicians and ERs when you really don't need to, right? And maybe going to a walk-in clinic instead. And so it needs to be set up to mirror what is in the private market, first of all, and I think that would help us. I think the second big issue we have is we have one insurer in the state that dominates the market. And we broke that up, or the federals broke that up when Bell South had that business model. So the question is, at what point do you become a monopoly in healthcare? Because a monopoly dominates the market and drives everything else. And so there's a question that you have to ask, and you have to debate that issue. I think the third thing is whenever you're looking at healthcare, if I'm going to go in and buy car insurance and I walk in and I tell my insurance agent, I just want the basic car plan, just the basic plan. They automatically know what that means, right? It's in statute. This is what that means. Here's what it is. Well, I want uninsured. I want an umbrella. I want this. That's all add-on services, right? And you understand that that's not part of the basic plan, and so I'm going to have to pay extra for that. Right now in healthcare, there is no consensus on what a healthcare policy is. Some people view it as a low copay with a low deductible with minimum out-of-pocket expenses to a plethora of doctors I want to go to, which you just said is a high-cost plan. Others want something else, but we have no standard of what a basic plan is. When you have no standard of what a basic plan is, you can't even assume what the costs are going to be. And so I think what we really need to do as a state is define what a basic health insurance plan is, which is what I think it was when they came in, which is a catastrophic plan. It might have a $5,000 deductible, it might have a $20,000 out of pocket, but you're not going to go medically bankrupt if you have a heart attack or have cancer, right? That's what the insurance was intended for. We moved away from that to all these high dollar but lowest cost plans that we want to pay out, assuming that those costs are going to go down. So we need to have conversations about what is a basic health plan. I think it's catastrophic, and then market that as a state. And then if you want something else, then you can come off of it, but you understand that that's going to cost more. Because you can get a catastrophic plan if you're 25 years old. It's going to cost you less than $200 a month, right? If I'm older and I'm 65, it's probably going to cost $800 a month because my risks are higher. But we got to have that conversation first off of like a car insurance plan. What is a basic plan that should be marketed in Tennessee?
Yeah. Yeah, healthcare is, I agree with you, but healthcare is such a tough bull
Well,
to
when
ride.
you have, look, part of the problem with the system is when your physician in your hospital have more people in the billing department than they do with patient care, you have a problem, right? Because then what happens is the amount of resources required to get paid, to meet the bills, to hand it into the insurance, that money their money in their practice should be going to patient care, but they're having to fight with insurance companies. Pharmacies too, fighting with insurance companies. Something has to change. I believe in the model to put the provider and the patient back in control, have more people in the insurance world, make the billing a whole lot easier than currently what it is. And you have all these practices out there of what they're doing, but you have to figure out how to give power back to the provider and the patient. That's how you increase patient care, and they shouldn't be spending more than 50% of their money trying to figure out how to get paid.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to this. Actually, in today's world, we sell or we buy health plans and not necessarily health
It doesn't guarantee that
insurance.
you have health. That's right.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. So, coming kind of full circle now, and thank you. This has been a great conversation. Coming full circle here, how has where you were raised on the plateau, plateau people, what we call them down here in the valley, plateau people. How has you been raised? How has that shaped how you view really challenging issues like, be it education, affordability of housing, affordability or delivery of health care? How has that shaped your view?
Well,
or how is that? How is what you used to think changed over time?
Well, I think when I grew up in the 70s, I was born in 1970, and I won't go into
that hurts.
the story of my family's background and where my parents came from to where they are today, right? Night and day different. We all have those stories to tell. But I think it's defined by hard work. I think Tennesseans in general, they want their success to be defined by themselves, not limited by government or limited by other people. And so I think that's the premise is how do we allow people to keep the feeling that they have a chance to be successful? Right, and I think some people lose hope of that, and then what happens a lot of times is government forces that hope away because you get dependent upon government. So I think in on the Cumberland Plateau, or as East and Middle or West Tennessee, I think people want to care for themselves. I think they want to be successful. I think they want to live the life that they want to live. But at the end, they're very prideful. They want to feel like they can meet the needs of their family. Right, I can meet the needs of my family. The affordability, it comes to that. It's things are expensive, but it's like I can't afford to allow my kid to go to this basketball camp now. Right, it's the things extra. I think at the same time, though, we also, as citizens and as individuals and as a state, we need to do a better job of prioritizing. Right, for example, if health insurance is the most important aspect to us, and we don't have health insurance, if I looked at your expenses, are you lean, or are you spending a lot of money on cell phones and streaming services that could go to insurance, right? And so you have to prioritize what's important to our state and to your family and others. I'm not going to ding somebody for not having the health insurance, but it becomes about what's a priority to you. Usually health insurance is not a priority until you need it, right? But it needs to be a priority before that, like life insurance. Life insurance isn't a priority until you pass away and your family has nothing left, right? And so are those things, should they be a priority sooner in life than thinking about it at the worst time, right? So I think in rural areas on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, I think if we can allow people to have an opportunity to be successful and reduce those burdens in those ways, we will be successful as a state. And that starts with education. And I'll on school choice. School choice is not about saying that all K through 12 schools are bad. That's not what it's about. But you also have to understand that every child is different. And they all need a different atmosphere. And some of them may thrive in public school. Some of them may not. And they may need a private school or a different path, right? We're not saying that public schools are bad. What we're saying is should your income determine your success in life? If you're rich, you can go to any school you want to, right? If you make enough money, you can go to any private school. But if your child's missing something, well, just say they have dyslexia and their needs are not being met in the school system, but you don't have the means to send them somewhere to another school like Curry Ingram or other places, which is highly expensive, to meet those needs, then we're not benefiting the future of our state. So school choice really is about allowing the parents the opportunity to make those decisions for their family, not have their zip code, address, or income level affect what they can and cannot do.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that folks from Tennessee, particularly those of us in East Tennessee and Plateau people, we still are really self-reliant people. We really believe that, ultimately you got to take care of yourself, you got to take care of your family, and don't depend on the government to do it for you.
And they're very church dependent. The church is going to help them. They want to help other people. Look, we're a very compassionate state, and people want to help you if you're truly in need and if you need help. You see it all the time, right? And then the church gets involved. I think sometimes we get away from that point, and it's easier to have government help us than the community help us. But I think we're always better off if the community can help us in our time of need. Or, give you the opportunity to help yourself. We can't make you be successful. We can't make you take that opportunity, but we should not limit you from having that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you. I know you're a super busy guy, and I want to thank you for taking time to be on my show today. If you've enjoyed today's show, I hope you'll take time to punch the button at the bottom to subscribe for the show. It helps get it out to the public. It also helps us talk about Tennessee state government because it is critical to all of our citizens. So again, this has been Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. See you next time.